Let's talk about cortisol. Cortisol, of course, that sounds really exciting, right? But cortisol is a hot topic typically when it comes to stress. It is a stress hormone, steroid hormone. It comes from your adrenal cortex, cortex. Just a quick rundown what it does. It's in a struggle with insulin over blood glucose. And it's not a bad hormone. It's a good hormone. In fact, when you run out of blood glucose, if you're wandering in the desert and you run out of glucose, and your brain's like, listen, we're going down, okay? Cortisol is going to go to your skeletal muscle, scavenge some of those amino acids, and run it through your liver through a process of gluconeogenesis and create more glucose, okay? It's not a bad hormone. It's just a hormone. It's a hormone there that's kind of like a safety, if you will, to make sure that we're always in a optimal range for blood glucose. It's part of what we call the counter-regulatory hormones with some others. So when it comes to training, though, we certainly do want to manage it. It will elevate with stress. So think about like stressful times. You don't sleep. You don't eat, or if you do, you crave carbs, you're trying to blunt cortisol. Cortisol probably has a link with belly fat increases. I don't know. I'll just say maybe. How's that? I could be wrong. I could be right. That it doesn't have anything to do with it directly. Maybe to some degree. I don't know for sure. But let's assume even it does, it's going to have a negative effect on your body composition because you're eating skeletal muscle mass, you're potentially producing more body fat, you're holding body water, and you're going to have a suppression of the immune system as well. That's why you see cortisone shots and things like that, is we're trying to reduce immune system function. So in high stress times, you're going to have an increase in cortisol. You could get sick as a result. I always tell the students, think about what happens after you do finals week. If you study all-nighters and do all this and don't eat very much, or you don't eat very well, frequently, you're exhausted, your cortisol levels are through the roof, you get a suppression of the immune system, you get sick. I see this in distance runners who don't manage their blood glucose very well when they're pulling these heavy mileages, is they tend to get a suppression of the immune system and they get sick. So the question then is, if we don't want cortisol to eat our muscles, if we don't want cortisol to suppress our immune system, how do we manage it? Carbs. Okay? Carbs. This is real simple. Remember that cortisol and insulin are interacting together over controlled blood glucose. When blood glucose levels are high, cortisol levels are going to be lower. It doesn't mean it goes to zero. Okay? They're going to be lower. When blood glucose levels are low and you don't put blood glucose in there, you're going to have energy liberation and you're going to send a signal through some metabolic processes and just the simple, the sensors in our body to say, hey, blood glucose levels are low. This is very practical and simplistic way of describing this. Blood glucose levels are low. Go ahead and raise up some of these counter-regulatory hormones, including cortisol. So if you do a really, really hard workout without any carbohydrates, let's say you do an hour and a half workout, your cortisol levels are coming up. When you work out, that's stress. And so you're producing more cortisol levels as a result of that. Okay? Cortisol is neither good nor bad in that situation in the sense that it's doing its job. It's just, reading the situation that, hey, blood glucose levels are down. I'm going to increase and start to go after some of the aminos in your muscles. Muscle protein breakdown. So when we think about net protein accretion, so how much muscle mass you actually build, it's a battle between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. And that muscle protein breakdown, that part of that is cortisol. So during a workout, eat workout carbs, sugar. Show your body, hey, look, glucose, chill out, cortisol. When the workout is over, show your body, hey, body, glucose, chill out, cortisol levels lower. We have research literature to support this. When you blunt cortisol levels, skeletal muscle mass grows a lot better. So if you lift weights, you increase your muscle protein synthesis, great. But reduce your muscle protein breakdown. If you're a runner, you're not getting a lot of muscle protein synthesis with your run. You're getting a fair amount of muscle protein breakdown, that's for sure. You got to eat carbs post-workout. Okay? Otherwise, you start eating skeletal muscle, which is, if you look at some of these other diets that omit carbohydrates, not a surprise, then you start to see a loss of lean mass over time. It's because of this consistent muscle protein breakdown as a result of high cortisol levels. So cortisol is neither good nor bad. It's a great hormone to have when you're in a fasted state in order to keep us alive. But if we're talking about recovery in sports and athletics, if you're talking about building muscle mass in the gym, if you're talking about general just health of skeletal muscle mass, lean mass, then you need to manage your cortisol levels well. Sleeping does a great job at doing that because we're talking about lowering the total stress. Not being a stressed out person lowers cortisol levels. That's a great idea. If it does influence belly fat, you're making, the visceral fat, you're making it a lot worse by being stressed out. You can be stressed out about your body weight, whole body water, increased body fat, potentially in viscera. That's not a good thing, right? So, learning how to relax is a very powerful tool. In fact, some of you have dieted know this. When you come off a diet, at times you see a nice drop in body weight because you lose all that body water as a result of the stress going away. Working harder in the gym may not be a good idea when you're trying to lose weight. If you're already working out 6 days a week, an hour a day, and you're in a cut, and you're like, I'm going to add more because I'm not losing weight. You may be working against yourself at that point because cortisol levels are rising. Even when you manage them fairly well, if you're in a high stress cycle, cortisol levels are drifting up over time. Okay, so you can manage them acutely and as best you can over chronically. But if you're in a really high stress time, cortisol levels are going to be drifting. Okay, and so keep that in mind. Managing cortisol with carbohydrates, managing cortisol with stress relief, sleep, and watching that stress level. When you start to get sick, again, this can just happen. So I'm not saying it's all cortisol's fault. But if you lower your immune systems, you suppress it a little bit, you're more likely to get sick. And it's not surprising then in times of high stress, we tend to get sick. And that's one of the factors that's going on. All right. So just a little information on cortisol, and how to deal with it. And if you're interested in recovery, you need to eat carbs with good timing in order to keep those levels low. That's why another reason. And there's some debate about, do you need to have that early morning breakfast because cortisol can, reset our metabolism in the morning and all these things. Eat breakfast. Eat breakfast. If anything, just for the control of hunger, some research literature says that's pretty good idea to eat breakfast, but it also blunts, or at least reduces the cortisol levels rising after a fast of sleeping. Okay, so having that breakfast meal is going to be important to keep our cortisol levels down as well. That includes carbohydrates. All right, so hope you find that interesting. There's a lot of information on cortisol out there, a lot of, I think, interesting supplements with cortisol, and it's simply carb related.